So one of the first scenes and factors that Gould will point to, as well as others after Gould, that are continuing this line of what I would call the skeptical interpretation of the play, is the very first scene after the chorus. So what we could call the machinations of the church in Act 1, Scene 1. And what we see here is we're shown right off the bat that the real reasons for the war are not patriotic, but it's backroom politics. And what we hear from two bishops that are discussing this issue right off the bat here is that Parliament is proposing a new law that would seize half the possessions of the church. And obviously these bishops are afraid of losing that wealth and power. These archbishops of Canterbury and Ely are looking for a way to avoid it by distracting Henry. And their way to distract him would be to support him in thoughts of war in France. So one note here is that the scene refers to this extreme wealth and earthly power that the church had at that time, the Roman Catholic Church in the 15th century, early 15th century, and preceding that. And the scene points ahead to measures that would be taken by Henry VIII a century later, and just before Shakespeare was writing in the 16th century, to seize the lands of the church and thereby curtail their power, strengthen the power of a centralized monarchy and state power. So the scene contains one of the only references to Parliament in Shakespeare. It refers to this bill in Commons. And just, this is a good opportunity to remind ourselves that Shakespeare's views of politics are always personal. So a regime is good, or is as good as the quality of the individual. And there's some discussion of institutions in the Roman plays, because this is what gives them strength. But what we see, especially in the English histories, are that with monarchy, with empire, the quality of a community, the quality of the regime is only as good as the individual leader. So I'd like to turn to a few of the lines here, and we can start to see some of this machination. So some of the lines in Act 1, Scene 1 from these bishops discussing this bill, and they're discussing at this point Henry V and what they can expect from Henry V, and whether Henry would be on their side. The courses of his youth promised it not. The breath no sooner left his father's body, but that his wildness mortified in him seemed to die too. So recall in Henry IV, part 1 and 2, Henry as a boy, Hal, he's not yet ascended to the throne. It has led this riotous youth. He's hanging out with Falstaff and these thieves and drunks in Eastcheap, and he's this real model of the prodigal son and a disappointment to his father and the royal court in general. Here the bishops have pointed out that he has had a miraculous change, so to speak, and now he's living up to the promise that seemed to have been wasted in him. Yea, at that very moment, consideration like an angel came and whipped the offending Adam out of him, leaving his body as a paradise to envelop and contain celestial spirits. Never was such a sudden scholar made. Never came reformation in a flood with such a heady current scouring faults, nor never hydra-headed willfulness so soon did lose his seat, and all at once as in this king. Bishop Ely replies, we are blessed in the change. Hear him but reason in divinity, and all admiring with an inward wish, you would desire the king were made a prelate. Hear him debate of commonwealth affairs, you would say it hath been all in all his study. List his discourse of war, and you shall hear a fearful battle rendered you in music. Turn him to any cause of policy, the Gordian knot of it he will unloose, familiar as his garter. That, when he speaks, the air a chartered libertine is still, and the mute wonder lurketh in his in men's ears, to steal his sweet and honeyed sentences, so that the art and practic part of life must be the mistress to this theoric, which is a wonder how his grace should glean it, since his addiction was to courses vain, his companies unlettered, rude and shallow, his hours filled up with riot, banquets, sports, and never noted in him any study, any retirement, any sequestration from open haunts and popularity. So the Bishop of Canterbury is saying it's almost a miracle how he was able to turn over this new leaf as soon as his father, Henry IV, died, and become this person who, without seemingly taking the time to study these things, he was able to discourse on theological matters like a prelate. He was able to discourse on political matters like a seasoned policy advisor. He's able to discourse on war. And as we'll see throughout this play, it's definitely war that stands out in terms of what he's able to articulate most clearly. So one point I'll say is Nietzsche later on called for these great heroes that would be like a Roman Caesar with Christ's soul, that would combine these two kind of competing worldviews or sets of virtues that we talked about as being at tension in the history plays in the first lecture. And in a way, Henry V, as presented by Shakespeare, does that. He combines the ability to discourse on war with his ability to discourse on theology. And he's able to potentially transcend the tragic conflict that we talked about in the first lecture. So a little bit later in this first scene, again, we'll pick up the dialogue of these two bishops. But my good Lord, how now for mitigation of this bill urged by the Commons? Doth his majesty incline to it or no? So they get to the point of, okay, do you think the king will support this bill? Are we in trouble if the king does? And the Bishop of Canterbury replies, he seems indifferent, or rather swaying more upon our part than cherishing the exhibitors against us. For I have made an offer to his majesty upon our spiritual convocation, and in regard of causes now in hand, which I have opened to his grace at large, as touching upon France, to give a greater sum than ever at one time the clergy yet did to his predecessors part withal. So a couple things to note there. Henry seems to be playing them off, right? He's dissembling. He's not making it clear which side he's going to go on, so he can use their incertitude to his advantage. It's very, you could say this is part of his Machiavellian, in a negative sense, maneuver, that his ability to play these other political pawns as pieces in a game. He's playing the clergy to some extent in order to get out of them this large donation. So Canterbury saying that they're giving a large donation and convincing him that he should go to war. And the reason they want him to go to war is to divert attention away from this bill that would take their lands.